everybody. I'm Catherine Jordan, and this is a live call on the topic of community resilience in challenging times. So I had this idea to reach out to all these amazing people that I know and have the privilege to call friends, who are doing wonderful work in the community and doing different things at this time. And I wanted to just see what people were up to and how we're responding personally in this time, and what we're seeing in our work, and what we're feeling drawn to in this time.
Yeah, I think the key piece that I'm here with around sacred response in this moment is about being in right relationship. About being in right relationship to what is. So speaking into some of what's already been mentioned here, but right relationship to ourselves, to each other, right relationship to the earth. It's like, how can I keep deepening into that rightness of that relationship? How can I keep showing up? Like, what's being asked of me now? And for me, one of my kind of explorations around this is creating kind of rhythm and routine in my life that actually leaves and creates the spaces for this kind of daily devotion to happen. Instead of like, oh, you know, just kind of being on that kind of hamster wheel, but actually like, this is the dedicated time to check in around these relationships. And what needs changing? What are the needs here? Are they being met? What needs tweaking? What needs like changing on a big scale? So that's kind of been my personal inquiry, ongoing inquiry in this time. And then, you know, within that, holding that place of like the tension of difference, the tension of not knowing, the tension of like confusion, uncertainty, and just being with that and not trying to kind of rush to some kind of resolution or knowledge or moving on, but actually just to sit in the uncomfortability and to find comfort in the uncomfortability.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad you named that, actually, and I am going to come to you, Suzi, and it's made me think actually that is something that I would really love us to speak to in considering a sacred response. You know, something we're all seeing, I'm sure, in our lives and in the world around us, is these polarities that are happening, that are becoming more and more extreme. And the extremes of also, you know, incredible fear, real terrified fears that some people are in, and what people like us are doing, which we're, you know, trying to find deep resource and ways to be with that unknown. Just wondering how we could speak to people around how we can engage sacred response to deal with that. I mean, you've just touched on that, Catherine, and what you've said. I just wondered if Suzi, I'm aware you wanted to speak as well, but yeah, don't know, that's just a question I feel like I'd love us to explore, how we can support people to engage a sacred response to all of that, you know, something deeper, to actually hold those polarities and not get caught in them so much. Maybe Suzi, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so what I wanted to say kind of speaks to that a bit anyway, just that what came up for me so strongly when Catherine spoke about right relationship is that somebody far wiser than me once said, all suffering is resistance. And that in a way, perhaps that's one of the single most useful things we could offer people to help them to try to arrive in a place where they can start to unpack what their sacred response might be, is that when we step out of resistance and into acceptance of what is, that then we can start to find our true relationship with what is, rather than what might have been or could have been or should have been. And that that as soon as you drop into what really is, especially if you take it right down to right here, right now, in my body, in this place, on this day, then for, I would suggest, the majority of people, it's not that bad. Certainly those privileged enough to be sitting on Facebook on a, whatever it is, Monday afternoon in February in the West, you know. And so when we can really start to count our blessings and really sit in what is happening now, then perhaps we can find our way more to a relationship of, okay, well, if I can look into my heart and see how do I really want to respond to what is happening now in me, and who do I love enough to hold that heart open to, and see if I can affect their reality also in a positive way. To me, I think that's a really big step in the right direction. But I'm also not suggesting that everybody's fine, and neither am I suggesting that we should all very complacently sit in the acceptance of what is without ever feeling into what might be if we had the courage to change.
Starting to understand about reincarnation, and we're always here. So for me, if I can, with love in my heart, help anybody not take their life, that's it. So what's also really important about this is that 2/3 of people that take their life aren't known to any medical service. So that means things like we're doing now are really important. We talk about, oh, we know that person, we know that person. That's just the real small amount. So this is a real community initiative that's needed. This is our ability to respond, responsibility to anybody. So what is our action? Love is an action. So again, we've also set up a charity called Goodwill in Action. And for me, that means for me personally, I have to purify myself. The people that I work with, I don't employ anybody, but I work with, and this is part of what we're doing now, are people, we've all been through our struggles, and all we're trying to do now is take what we've learned from our pain and suffering and give back. So when I sit with a person that's feeling suicidal, when our organization does training, we know that so many people have been touched by suicide. And the ability to listen whilst that person is suffering and trust in our hearts that that person has something in them that is a life force that wants to make them live is all I can do. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm not going to meet someone or lose people to suicide. I've picked up body parts of people who jumped in front of trains. I've had 2 lady friends of mine who just died by suicide. No one would know. So my plea from one thing tonight is to trust that we never know what's going on in somebody's head, but where possible, connect without judgment, deep listening, and a loving heart.
So I know that you touched on something in the beginning, Cathy, that really resonated for me, which is an excitement at this moment of opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're feeling that in exactly the same way, but I feel drawn to ask you more about that. What is that for you? Yeah.
Well, you can look at it in different ways. You can look at it, the bigger picture is any moment of crisis is always the biggest moment of creativity, because all the rules fall away. And we so can see, we were sleepwalking. Most of us were sleepwalking within our culture. I mean, Western culture has a lot to answer for. We developed a lot, we did very well, but we also were really screwing up. And we were sleepwalking, we just couldn't see it. And so there's the opportunity of having to change. There's the opportunity of crisis. And then there's the answers that I found in the research that I've done the last few days, which I can only answer really by looking through my document and telling you different things I found, if that's a suitable point in this conversation for me.
Yeah, if you would like to. If you have
right, let me reopen my document.
Right.
The first organisation that I am now completely in love with is called Food Citizenship. And they make the point that we are completely, our mindset has been completely one of being a consumer. So we have boxed ourselves into the receiving position. So we have all these corporations doing an awful lot of work, and then we're the bottom receivers. And then we also have governments legislating. Excuse me, I haven't got COVID, but I have got a cough. So we have imagined that we have no agency. We have, I mean, you Catherine, I have some awareness of your circumstances. I know the town that you're living in. I know there's no real option for you to be growing food. And our mindsets are so commonly singular. We're trying to solve it for ourselves. And being single people or single households, we don't imagine there's anything we can do other than shop. And we may be trying to shop ethically, but that's where our mindset has been. This organization, Food Citizenship, are talking about when enough of us get together and appreciate that we have agency, then we are more powerful than the corporations. So that's, it's a mindset shift. If that mindset changes, then everything else falls into place. Changing a mindset is only about education. It's only about having a conversation like this and a light bulb going off and thinking, okay, yeah, if I just find 20 people who care about the same thing, we can start something, we can do something. And then if you have 2,000 people, 20,000 people, which you can have very quickly, you can change the whole food system of a country. Really, you can. So Food Citizenship, they're on the case. Great news. Look at this document, find the link, go look for them. Then we have something called the National Food Strategy Organization, which is an independent review. It's been commissioned by the government, but it's being undertaken by independent people. And they're looking to create a better food system for the nation. So it's government backed, and they're looking for fundamental change. And all the things that I know you, I presume anybody who cares about food resilience, all the things that you wish will be addressed are in their objectives. I've read their front page. Excellent, absolutely excellent. They've produced the first phase. They've produced a preliminary report, and they've interviewed 1,600 interested parties, and they're now producing phase 2 of their report. So fingers crossed on that one.
So now I'd like to focus a bit on a few examples of models that exist today, because many times when we think about these models or these examples, we think that it can only be done at a very local community level. But I'm going to show you at least 3 right now that are either regional or even national. So the first one is called Siembra con Mano de Mujeres, and it was an effort that came to be in Venezuela and due to the pandemic. So it came to be because of the pandemic. It's a program of productive communal plots, and it's led by women. And the whole idea was to supply food during lockdown. It also provides virtual training and network building, and it's at a state level. So it's a state in Venezuela where they're doing this, and it has been very, very successful in keeping people fed during the lockdown. The next one is called Solidarity Market Flor de Luna, and this is in Mexico. And this one actually spans across the entire southern region of the country. It's an effort led by women who participate in different productive and civic initiatives facing economic and ecological crises. It is a market that unites co-ops, organizations, groups from across the southern Mexican region to exchange products, provide capacity building workshops, and share what they call solidarity baskets with those most in need in that specific time. So they get together, I believe, once a month, And whoever has a need in that month, they will give these solidarity baskets, which has, you know, food and other necessary items. And they also teach forestry to urban areas. So it goes a bit beyond just the people who participate in that market. And then a model, which is quite interesting, and it's growing in popularity and it's growing in importance in the Andean region in South America, is this idea of buen vivir. And this is a model that came from the Quechua indigenous people in Bolivia and Ecuador, and what they call it sumac causai, which is really focusing not only on well-being, which is a lot of what we hear about, but on good living. And for them, that means more consciousness, having functional and healthy consumption. So thinking about why we're consuming, integrating ancestral and rural knowledge at its core. It's a socio-ecological and a socio-emotional model. And again, this isn't really just at a local communal level, it's regional. And even more, this model has been incorporated into the constitutions of both Ecuador and Bolivia. So it's national, it's even binational now, but also this model has permeated into other countries in the Andean region. And so I guess one of the main things is, you know, it's thinking about feeling good, about thinking good. And that means, you know, having time for contemplation, having time to think about others. So it's really a different way of thinking about economics in general.
Fred, when we were talking, I was really struck by how you were moved into deep adaptation by your daughter. By you had a story you told me about the experience of your daughter and how that provoked you to get involved in deep adaptation work. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Oh gosh, yes, right. Yes, that was a tingle at the back of my neck and a lump in the throat. There it is. So I've got two daughters, one who's 32, you know, who's kind of out there in the world, one who's 10 now. But a couple of years ago, when she was 8, it was bedtime. The story had been read, the light had been switched off, and it's that moment, you know, when stuff gets said before they drift off. And so it was that moment, and she just said, and this is, I can't overemphasize this enough, this was not apropos of anything. There was no preceding dialogue, no preceding events. There'd been nothing had happened in the family at all about this subject, ever, okay? It's really important to say that. She said, Dad, the planet's dying. And I'm really scared that I'm not going to live old enough to know what it's like to be a teenager or a grown-up. So I dad joked it into the long grass, something along the lines of, yeah, but not before Saturday, because we've got to go to St. Nick's Market to drink hot chocolate and do stuff. And she chuckled and snuggled up in that kind of, you know, Dad's got this kind of way. But me, it was like, right, I know what I just did. I did that, and I'm going to have to come back with some kind of credible answer. And so the journey began, and there was no turning back. There was like literally no turning back. And it's, you know, from there to Googling climate change, to Jem's paper, to looking at the references in Jem's paper, to snowballing off those and off. And there it is. And here we are. 2 years and a couple of months later. And my eldest has been throwing in curveballs from the left field because she's of a childbearing age and had been thinking about that and is now having more than second thoughts about that. And then has been talking to me about, you know, it's already happening for people, Dad. You're starting to get freaked out about it, but you do realize this has been going on the other side of the world for years. Why is this now suddenly so important? I was like, oh my God, now I've got that. Just like, yeah, totally. But honest, I joke moan, like really, I'm so grateful for these two humans in my life, because otherwise I'd be wandering around with bloody bobble hat over my face and my fingers in my ears. I don't want to know. And given what I felt along the journey, it's been harrowing. I'm not going to lie. It's been really harrowing. So I can forgive people and love people with their bobble hats over their eyes and their fingers in their ears. It's like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, but you're going to have to take that bobble hat off and you're going to have to take those fingers out.
Our drive to conquer as meeting some fundamental psychological needs. And so I really need to ask for forgiveness in what I'm about to say, but I do think that awareness actually may very well not be enough, because I think that there are some very valid needs that are being met through the drive to conquer. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes to try and bring out how I see that. And it's brought me to think about us human beings as a social creature. And what is it, you know, particularly in the West, we think about ourselves, and our whole story about ourselves is that we are individuals. And so that's where that proposition that winning and conquering is so positive, because that's in service to the individual getting what we need. And we've constructed this either or set of ideas that I can only get what I need if others, you know, by conquering others. But actually, what's at the heart of being a social creature? It seems to me that at the heart of being a social creature is a sense of what I'm going to call goodness. Now, I'm going to give you a warning. There are 3 words I'm going to use. All of them need much more unpacking than we've got time for today. But I hope that I'll be able to communicate something of the essence of them. So the first one is that we need to know ourselves as social creatures as having some essential goodness at the core of us. When we are social, we want to be of service to the whole. We don't only want to be of service to ourselves. For me, that's a really core idea in being a social creature, a social species. So I'm going to invite you to think about a triangle, and at the bottom of the triangle is that concept of ourselves as good. And then there are the 2 sides of the triangle that reach to different corners. I think when we think about ourselves, we also need to see ourselves as and know ourselves as valid. That each of our individual lives is valid. So the needs that we have as a specimen of the human species are valid. And so for me, this has been the most critical insight of what I've learned when I think about what happened to how the Nazis began to see Jews. Because what happened in that period of history is that within German people's eyes, Jews lost their validity. And those of us who have looked into this, it's been recorded so many times that the Jews began to be described in language that was subhuman. And most often they began to be described as vermin. And that is a way of stealing away the validity of what it means to be human. So I'm not even talking about dignity. I'm really talking about that core quality of my life is valid. I'm entitled to it. I'm entitled to breathe. I'm entitled to fulfill myself. I'm entitled to desire even to fulfill myself. I'm entitled to desire to live a good and healthy life and to contribute to the whole. So there's something very important about that. What would drive somebody to need to steal the validity of the other and take it to oneself? And then this is the more complicated word, the other side of the triangle is that I think we also need to know ourselves to feel that we're valid. There's a level of our consciousness that needs to know ourselves as innocent. And I mean that in a very particular way. I'm drawing from the psychodynamic theories of psychology, so Freud and Jung, which Freud in particular focused on the origins of personality being shaped in our very young experience as babies. So that's one of my foundation stones. So if I think about innocence, I'm really talking about we are innocent, are valid, particularly when we're very young. And if we think about how our personalities get shaped, they get shaped by the interaction of our innate character with our environment. And so there's a level at which if our needs, our valid needs don't get met, how our personality then gets shaped in response to that, very young, there's a level at which we're also innocent of our response to that. We're doing our best to respond as well as we possibly can to the adversity that we're experiencing.
Move on to some bit more personal questions so we can find out a bit more about both of you. So Anne, I'll start with your question if that's okay. So Anne, from what we were talking about, this is a question that came out of our conversation. When we spoke, you mentioned something called Psychotherapeutic Alliance and how this can help with developing resilience. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about what is Psychotherapeutic Alliance and how do you understand it to be helpful in relation to trauma and resilience?
Okay, yeah.
Big question.
It is, yeah. Let's see which end of the stick I'll grab. I guess the idea is, for me, you know, I think because trauma is one of the experience of trauma only stays lodged in the body as traumatic when we're alone in overwhelm. So to me, that's the definition of trauma, whatever it is, you know, and that we can only heal trauma together in relationship. That's the way I see it. I mean, you mentioned Peter Levine and how he managed his own trauma. I think in Waking the Tiger, that book, he was talking about when he was hit by a car and he was down and he didn't know what was happening. As he was kind of coming to, a woman came up to him. I forget what kind of, maybe she was a teacher or something, but she knew to get down to where he was. And she asked him if there was anything that she could do. And he said, just hold my hand. And she held his hand and she maintained eye contact. And he let his body do what it needed to do to release the trauma. So she was with him as a witness, as a fellow human being in relationship. And it was, he let his body do what it needed to do. And he was certain that that was what helped him be able to downregulate enough his system in order to process the trauma on the spot. And it wasn't something he would have to be working with for years to come. So for me, the Therapeutic Alliance is about creating that relational safety so that, you know, say if you were my client, come and we would drop down together into a space and co-regulate that way, you know, so to a space where you feel safe. And that's where we would be working within that space, within that window of tolerance. And it's a communication between two people that allows us to go into this terrain.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. And we're going to talk a bit more about co-regulation a bit later, so we'll elaborate that. I know you just mentioned there about window of tolerance. Do you mind just explaining what that is for people that aren't familiar with that term?
Yeah, exactly. So that's it's sort of as you approach the material that you want to work with, that we would work with together. It's the sensations. I work a lot with the body, the sensations in the body, with the breath, and whatever arises there might be trembling, it might be feelings of anger, it might be, you know, and we work within a margin of we try to find that margin of comfort and discomfort. It's always held within the relational safety. So the sense of, is this okay? There's always, you know, I'm always asking permission. There's always consent, and we slow it down and we slow it down. And if it's too much, we back away from that piece together. But that's the window of tolerance. So it expands as you become more aware of it, as we examine it together. And that's what creates, in my opinion, resilience in order to be able to reconsolidate memory and, more coherence in our lives.
Yeah, and it's a really important part of what we do as psychotherapists, isn't it? Is supporting our clients to develop that capacity to kind of tolerate, but also know where their edges are, and something we have to practice as well, right? Just so knowing where our edges of tolerance are as well, and not, actively not pushing past that, but learning where it is skillfully, and learning to sort of come back from dealing with things when they become too much. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
Can I jump in and there's something there?
Yeah, sure.
I think something that just really came up for me is Anne was talking, it was tied to what you were saying earlier as well about what's sort of culturally acceptable. And I think there's often a thing around trauma with shame, be really interesting conversation, sort of to what extent those two intersect, and kind of is all shame traumatic? Probably, and kind of does all trauma have an element of shame? Like maybe even, especially because we, in all the ways that you were just talking about, kind of don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable. We don't express afterwards, we don't go and flap our wings, or the equivalent might be, as we keep a stiff upper lip, pretend that everything's okay. We don't know how to reach out to people for help. So we have these kind of really difficult feelings, and at the same time we feel shame about those difficult feelings, which just kind of compounds the whole issue, which is why relationship is so important. A tuned relationship is so important, and hopefully kind of one of the ways in which therapy helps.